I like that idea.
Oh, we're live.
Well,
Woo! You are looking live at the GovCast from Florida. We got a kidnap. We kidnapped somebody to be on the show today. Stuck them in a basement. That's how we got to get our guests now. Woo!
that's great.
So good. That is so good. That's what it takes. We now have to kidnap our guests to have them come to the show. That's what we're going to do today. We had to kidnap Carson Heady to come on the show. We locked him in his basement. So that's how we have to do it. Sometimes you got to do what you got to do. Amen.
Make it work. Yep.
That's how it works. Hey, I hope everybody's doing great as we get near the end of the quarter, the end of June, getting near 4th of July holiday. Dre, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, Andrea. Good to see everybody. I don't know. It's almost the end of the quarter. Stress is rising, but we're here.
You're so relaxed and calm. You were so prepared. You've been here for an hour, just chill as could be.
This isn't my only job.
Job?
My other jobs make me a little more money.
We'll have to talk about your contract to be on the show. Stevie B?
Kidding.
Yeah, my contract's great. I love this job. This is the best.
Based on hosting this show. You'll get in residuals for years to come. When
Me,
We're going to be famous one day.
Like
They're going to have
Seinfeld.
our faces somewhere.
Like Seinfeld. Totally.
It's on the internet. It lives forever. Stephen Bryan, the Dean of GovSales University. I was actually on a call right before this, Jackson. Sorry for the late pop in. But Carson, if you're out there, he said he was joining us. So you're tuned in for a great show.
Yeah, this is going to live. Like when it pops off, people look back at the early shows, like the first Seinfeld, and be like, oh, it was so different back then. So we're in a big studio, like Joe Rogan, popping off on Spotify. We'll be big time. People will be like, remember when you used to sit in their houses and there was like a shower curtain behind them and a cat and a beaker hat? See?
We'll still have the beaker. We'll still do the beaker.
Bring the beaker somewhere.
It makes us look like real.
And we had beaker graphics. Remember that? So funny. Hey, listen, we actually had a chance to get together as a team last week. So as we return to normal, hopefully you all have that opportunity. There we are. The GovSpend team gathered up.
Steven? Hold on.
Steven's there.
Oh, there you are right there.
Oh, yeah.
On the right side, next to Mackenzie.
Next to Mackenzie and Rosie.
That's it. I think Gray Oakley wins for best dress. Look at that. Brought the
I liked his outfit too.
I know.
Yes, there was a lot happening that day. Look, for the first time, we were able to get together for the first time in about a year and a half as a team. So hopefully all of you are also being able to connect with folks and spend a little time with your team. And then maybe you, like us, are challenging, are we going back to the office? Are we not going back? Hybrid, right? The debate across America's LinkedIn landscape. What's the new work model? So who knows?
I like hybrid.
I think hybrid's the way. I think that's what well, Deloitte just said. They're never going back. And then Morgan said everybody's going back. So
I feel like, though, it gives you a reason to get dressed. Like, it gives you a reason, like, actually get ready for your day. Like, so many people now, like, you've got your going out clothes or your work at home clothes, like your lounge clothes. Like, I don't know, it's just a reason, like, get ready every day. And you get to see your coworkers. It was funny. I was in there the other day, and there was probably, like, 6 of us, and it was quiet for, like, an hour. And I was like, so finally looked around. I'm like, does somebody want to make a phone call? And I think everyone's just so used to making your calls in your house where nobody can hear you that there's like this intimidation of like getting back to reality.
Back.
So anyway, so it took a little bit, but I think it's good.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think folks intuitively are like, oh, I want to stay at home. I don't want to commute. But they miss some of the interpersonal stuff, and a chance to develop. And it's such a big part of what people have done for so many years. And so it looks like there will be some hybrid model that will be prevalent for most companies. And good luck to you to figure out what works best for you. And so, Steve, any comment? Would you like hybrid or you want back? What's GSU doing? Are you going all online? What's GSU doing?
Hybrid. We're sticking with the company policy. So, we go to flow. Sometimes I'll be in Satellite Beach. Sometimes I'll be down in Deerfield.
You never know.
Boynton.
North Carolina.
North Carolinas.
Jumping off cliffs over there. So listen, last week, if you were here, we actually had a webinar talking about education. So Steve, why don't you tell the folks last chance to get in on that?
Yeah, we still have the actual webinar replay up on our site. So I think they'll be taking it down on Friday. So if you go to govsalesuniversity.com, there'll be a thing that says webinars. You can just do the drop down, but the URL is sales to schools. It was awesome. Like, I think there's been a lot of need to have the schools open back up. And with the American Rescue Plan Act, there's $180 billion that they're putting back into this market, K through 12 education. And the start of their fiscal year is July 1st. So now is like the opportune time. The end of June, you're getting that use it or lose it funds. And then to kick off the new year, going on the next 3 years, actually, they have a huge roadmap to get things ramped up. Yeah. There's all these categories. So if you're not familiar with the categories, just go on our website, govsalesuniversity.com, click webinar, sales to schools, and you'll find the little tips and tricks that we shared. It's completely free to download. Just put in your name, email, and then you'll get a link that'll give you that recording.
And listen, now is the time. When folks hear about schools, they're like, schools don't have any money and but it's not true. Listen, there is a connection between COVID stimulus and the schools got a ton of money out of that, and they have more money than they've ever had. And so now, literally right now is the time the schools have a ton of money allocated to them. And so if you have anything, both historically that's great for schools or in the new school world where some of it's remote and the technology and infrastructure, now is the time to go sell to schools. So I encourage you to go download that. It's amazing, amazing, amazing. I don't even, what is that? What is that link? Look, the production team. Wait, that was not a marketing link. Take that one back. No.
That was a UTM tracking link right there.
So encourage you to go see that webinar last week. It was amazing. Ton of interest, ton of folks signed up. So tell them it's in the comments. Great. It's in the comments. The production crew, look in the notes.
Hello.
Great. That is a mess, that link right there. Forget about it. The production team, Bitly. There's this thing called Bitly. Tighten that thing up. Listen, let's bring in Carson Heady. He's locked in his basement in there in St. Louis. So I don't know what we had to do. The production team had to get kidnapped. What's happening, Carson? What happened? They stuck you down in the basement and won't let you out?
Yeah, well, I'm going through the process of moving. And so as I was joking with you guys before the show, even the books on the bookshelf that typically make me look very well read are not even here. They're in boxes. So I am in the process of moving, not far, but moving nonetheless. So I'm here in the basement as action happens upstairs.
All right. Well, thank you so much. So he's the director of U.S. Health and Life Sciences for Microsoft. And so we have moved up our guest list. So in the top 100 or 1 million LinkedIn lives now, that's what we're moving up. I think 100 grand now, top 100 grand. We're so blessed to have him. If many of you are probably following Carson, he has a huge following online. So can you give the folks a little bit about your background, that maybe the two folks that don't know you, Carson, and then we'll kind of dive into some of the things you're doing.
Sure, happy to, and thanks so much for having me today. It's an honor and a pleasure. Just a little about me. I'm just a student of sales. I'm a small town kid from Midwest U.S. and grew up in a small town and started out in sales earlier in my career. I'm not going to tell you how long because that'll age me a little bit, but been in sales for quite some time. Started out in a one-call close environment in telecom and have worked through advertising and wireless, and I've been with Microsoft for the last 7.5 years. So with Microsoft, I've supported every industry vertical that we have, so including state and local government, but also retail, manufacturing, construction, et cetera, and currently healthcare. I've been in the healthcare segment for a couple of years, and then recently took on the role as director of the Central Region.
That's awesome. So listen, for those watching the show, comments or questions put below. Super excited today because Carson's kind of claim to fame is social selling. So over 400,000 followers, I think, across his networks. A 7-time President's Club, a Gold Club winner. So it's somebody who's selling real world. This is not one of those like one-off consultants, one of these branded folks that's not selling anymore. So working one of the best companies in America, selling and working on the social selling piece. And so a lot of good tips out there. And so can you share maybe how you got into this realm, Carson? Like, how did you get from like standard salesperson stuff to kind of the social selling part of it? And when did the bell go off for you, the light go off that, hey, there's something here?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. In fact, it's quite ironic given the fact that I had a successful career at AT&T in a completely different realm. And I had to reinvent myself. After that, I went to the Yellow Pages business when they started selling internet. And that division obviously looks very different than it once did. So long story short, wound up having to reinvent myself. And after a couple of different endeavors, working for some small organizations and cutting my teeth on prospecting with social selling and LinkedIn, wound up at Microsoft and leveraged some of the very same tools. It's interesting to look at social because in my mind, social is just one element. I mean, it's one tool in the tool bag that enables you to open doors that you may not have been able to open otherwise. Yeah. But it's what you do with that opportunity after the fact that matters most, which doesn't necessarily always involve social. Social is great because it arms you with information. You can use that information to find just about anybody that you want, and you can ultimately try to create relationships. I just focus on the quality of my outreach, the quantity of outreaches, and the consistency that I execute over time. Where a lot of people may reach out to 5, 10, 15 people in an organization, I'll reach out to hundreds, and it increases my probability of success. When I started doing social selling in Microsoft, it was kind of an anomaly. Nobody really knew what it was. Or they said, yeah, it sounds great in theory, but do you have any results to back it up? Which when I started, I didn't. But over time, after multi-million-dollar deals started rolling in as a result strictly of social selling relationships, people started to take notice. I was asked to train and coach it, and it begat me being pulled into different roles in the organization. On paper, I have no necessarily business being an IT solution sales, but I've been really fortunate to be successful here because I've understood my own superpower, but also the superpower of others. You know, it's about creating relationships, but then bringing all the smart people into the boat with you. I work with some brilliant people, and I'm very fortunate.
Can you share with our what is it? You mentioned the ROI. Like we all know, CEO bosses can be like, "Why are you wasting your time over there? What's the ROI? When's the last time you got a sale?" Can you give folks what if someone starts down this road? What is the relative timing? Hey, it's going to take you a while before you get a deal, before you get a good lead. Like what? Can you give folks some benchmark? I know it can vary greatly, but what have you seen the norm when someone jumps into this world? They shouldn't probably get a LinkedIn tomorrow and expect a deal Friday. So what's the norm you've seen, or what's a good benchmark?
No, Jack, that's a great question because there's certainly deals that I could point to that started via social selling a year and a half ago, that because of long sales cycles, they're still in the process. However, I think you should be able to point to pipeline relatively quickly. That's a tangible element. Total number of contacts gleaned and also total amount of pipeline that you've developed. These are tangible components that you can point to right away. And so in the early going, when my team and I were driving more pipeline than anyone else, people started to take notice what's happening here. And it's relationships that are forming on LinkedIn. It's bringing the full team into the boat, and it's just adequate tracking. I think the other element too, I mentioned the quality of messaging. We got to realize that some of these executives or influencers that we're reaching out to, they're being wooed by hundreds, if not thousands of people. So how do I make sure my messaging stands apart from those thousands, and that I make sure that I go into the context of what matters to the customer as opposed to what matters to me? So many people reach out on LinkedIn and say, hey, these are all the great things my company does. Yeah, who cares? Here's the bottom line. If I can come to you and acknowledge first off that, look, you probably invest with my company today, but if you don't, there's legitimate value and substantial resources that I can bring to you. Would love to just have a conversation to see what that looks like. I focus on getting the conversation so that I can earn the relationship, as opposed to assuming that I have something right out of the gate that's going to be of interest. So I try to meet them where they are first. So it's all about the approach, the quality of messaging, quantity. We're in a probability game. Sales is a probability game, but as opposed to telling my sellers, hey, call 100 calls and you're going to sell more. It doesn't work like that. It's all about the quality of the messaging over that quantity. So we really focus on trying to meet more influencers, but also the influencers of influencers, because those are very important relationships as well. And then frankly, the consistency over time. I can't go out and social sell one day and then just expect to get a bunch of pipeline and then say, oh, well, shucks, that didn't work, so I'm going to move on and go back to my comfortable ways of mediocrity. No, I've got to make sure that I see that through, that I schedule conscious time to prospect every week. And so that's what I've done, and it's worked quite well.
That's awesome.
So especially during COVID, I think a lot of our team has been doing more of the social selling, right? We're hitting more people up on LinkedIn, and a lot of people have had success with it. But what would be like some of your, maybe a couple tips for the messaging, or like how some of the outreach looks like specifically on LinkedIn?
Very astute question. You're right. I think, with the pandemic, there has been a lot of leveraging of virtual, social tools, and it's been some of it out of necessity. What I find fascinating about your question too is that, for people that were doing it beforehand, they already had a process in place. They had to tweak and evolve that process based on the parameters that we were in. In fact, a lot of my outreach early on in the pandemic was far from salesy. It was more checking with my existing network to make sure that they and their organization were okay, that they and their family were okay, that thinking about them, and that I was here, I was around, I was a resource. So again, focused on the relationship element, because I think with an increased frequency in some of this LinkedIn marketing during a pandemic, you're also going to probably see an increase in some of the not so effective methods. There's going to be a lot of people that are still reaching out because they feel like it's a better way of getting a hold of some of these folks. They're not able to go into in-person meetings at that time. And so I think they're relying on these methods, but maybe their process isn't super sound. So I think the messaging has got to be crisp, but it's also got to be timely and attuned to where you believe the customer is. Now, what's great about LinkedIn, and frankly any other platform, or business journals, or different industry trade type of information, is that all of these types of things can keep you at the pulse of what's happening in the industry, in the business, organization. And so I think what you want to make sure you focus on is what is going to be, or what could I speculate is going to be top of mind? Did I notice that they had a new executive join their organization? Did I notice that there's a trend in their industry that has shifted as a result of the pandemic? And maybe ask for their insight or their advice or their guidance about some of these types of things. Or perhaps you offer an insight and say, hey, many of the organizations that I'm working for of your ilk are handling this situation this way. Thoughts. Would love to have a conversation just to walk through this. We also have industry executives and experts that maybe could lend a hand or offer some perspective if you're still grappling with this challenge. Try to bring something new and fresh and unique to the table, and acknowledge the fact that most of the people that are using these mediums are probably not using them overly effectively.
Just a subsequent question to that. So how often would you say your touches are through LinkedIn?
Good question. There's a lot of different types of touches. Marketing will dictate that often people need to see your name or your brand 5 to 8 times before they would even make a purchase. We also see that often, 57% of customers are already pretty far down the buying journey by the time they even talk to a seller. So I think we have to be very cognizant of that. So a one touch might be me sending a LinkedIn connection request. I mean, we could debate the effectiveness of InMail. I'm not here to do that. I typically send a first degree connection request to a customer, and I frankly try to create some type of synergy in that, maybe we're in the same industry. Maybe I've got a story to share about what we've done for somebody in their industry, but really just trying to add free value and be a resource up front. So that might be a first touch point. If they accept, I'm also not super opportunistic. I don't reach out immediately and send some type of, sales pitch. It's really just exactly the fangs are I'm primed and ready, right? I try to wait a few days. I send a note, really just requesting a meeting, try to focus on that. So there's another touch. Obviously, try to get that connection, have that conversation. There's another touch. Send a recap to that conversation, making introductions to people on my team, or maybe a partner that I recommended. That could be another touch. But what's great about being a first degree connection is there's a passive sales component to that as well. Because if I'm posting things about my organization or things that are happening in their industry, where I see an article that I know will resonate with them, I can send that very easily. Another quick touch, but it takes seconds to do. And then lastly, they can see the posts that I'm making. I typically try to see if they want to opt into a webinar or newsletter series that I do. So these are all passive touches, but they work very well. I've had organizations and clients that I've targeted in 1 year for a relationship that I didn't really talk to much over year 1, year 2, but by year 3, they started showing up on webinars, and we got a deal done later that year. So I think the key element is that you're looking at quality and quantity of touches, but it could be, those touches could look very similar to what I just described.
Yeah, I would just say to our audience, I just encourage you, have patience. Like, goodness gracious, we all hate, we just connected. Here's my sales pitch. It's it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. So if you can deliver 3, 4, 7 things before you ask for something, God bless. I mean, easy peasy. People were like, connect. Now you need to buy something for me tomorrow. It's everyone hates that person. So I don't know why that at this point in social media is selling. I don't know why everyone doesn't understand that, because that is the most irritating piece. So long view, marathon,
I think it's uncomfortable muscle for some people. I think that's why. And then something happens and you feel compelled to reach out immediately. But I think you got to keep a steady hand on the wheel and you got to have trust in the process.
Yeah.
Yeah. A quick question. I got another one. But when you first engage with people for that initial connection, are you just clicking connect, or do you put a message in there with something, or do you leave it blank?
Always a message. And here's why. It's the same reason that I leave voicemails. So it's the same reason that I leave voicemails when I call. And I know that's a big Jeb Blunt mantra. The key element is it's probability. It's all about probability. So sales to me is a people and process game. It's about relationships and resources. So if I hit connect, my probability of getting them to accept might be 10, 20%. But my messaging that I use today, I get about a 45% acceptance rate because it is very focused on a specific reason that I'm reaching out, maybe any mutual synergies that I've noticed, whether it's we share an alma mater, all the way to, I know somebody that they know or an industry expert that works in their industry. But great question, because it's in my mind, it's important to add the message because it increases your probability of success. I try to, even though there's a lot of emotion in sales, I try to look at the process very dispassionately. And if you can do that and you can look at the things that increase your probability of success, like, for instance, reaching out to more people in an organization in an attempt to get a conversation, those are the hustle stats that are going to ultimately equate to winning.
Yeah, I've always believed, sales is a contact sport, right? The more people you contact, the more your pipeline. It's just inevitability, right? A lot of people don't like to put themselves out there. And I was recently listening to another cast that you were on. It was like a video screen share talking about authenticity, just being yourself. And I feel like, especially with younger generations, because in your 20s, you're still trying to find yourself, right? As much as you think you have it figured out at the time, when you get to your 30s, 40s, 50s, then you grow as a person and you can truly come into your own. And sharing that, like even your faults, right, to a point, and saying, hey, these are things I messed up on. I feel like younger folks, they want to put on that, I'm an account executive. I am a poised professional and I make no mistakes. So I'm just curious to see, your experience, how you're coaching and leading people, with your programs and books, of how you've helped people find their own, to be that authentic, because that's really where they're going to connect with people on that social level.
Yeah, it's a phenomenal question. I'm a big believer in authenticity and being genuine, just because of the fact that, look, it's a relationships game. I actually got a note from somebody that I worked with years ago this morning that had just finished reading one of my books. And it was fascinating because, in her note, she basically just outlined what you said, that I took a different approach as a seller than most anybody else that she came into contact with. I think we were talking about the show Seinfeld earlier on. And I think about the George Costanza episode, The Opposite. That was always my all-time episode. Favorite all-time episode. Because he did the exact opposite of what everyone else did, or what his impulses told him to do. And that was ultimately what led to his success. And what I think is fantastic about your question is that, really it's a people business. And so I've used social in order to create relationships with people that I might not have been able to meet otherwise. But again, I want to stress that once you do that, all of the personal components matter most. Then it's, I may have created a relationship in LinkedIn, but I need to get into the office or to the boardroom with that person. I need to have lunch with that person. I need to be on the phone with that person. I need to understand their motivations, and I need to understand what looks like a win to them. I also love that you pointed out the losses. Especially as you're starting out in your career. And I think a lot of people, they just have this sense like you've got to be bulletproof and nothing phases you. I've learned more from my losses than anything else in my entire career. And that could be from loss of job to, being promised things that didn't come to fruition, to things that happened that were unfair, or frankly, deals that I lost that I learned from, because you better believe me that that same thing that burned me never burned me again. And so you get to a point over your career. I sometimes wonder how I had the audacity to write a book about sales and leadership in my 20s, because I have a completely different perspective now than I did then. And I look at things so differently because of that experience and because of the wins and losses over time. But all of it boils down to people and process. And if you can, obviously evolve your approaches based on, to the great question that Dre asked earlier, the situation we were in a pandemic. You shift your focus, you shift your process, you shift how you worked with people, but it's all about serving and delivering and adding value. And if you can keep those things at the core of who you are, you can do anything.
I love, for our audience, I would just say, I totally agree in the 180-degree opposite approach. I think we talk about that internally in our company. That's how you stand out. If you're just doing everything like everybody else, you're just part of everyone else and part of the herd. If you can find a way to just do it differently, even if it's just to get in the door, then you can go back to your standard stuff. But I encourage everybody, our team and all of you, like, find a different way, because that's how you stand out. And by the way, some of that will explode in your face, right? It's not perfect. So everyone take a risk.
Yeah.
Sometimes doesn't always go well, but at least you're in the game. Like, it's way better than part of the herd being like, you're just one of 10,000 people. So whatever. Yeah. So that graphic came up. And so Carson's been very humble about it, but he has a couple books out. Start with the birth of a salesman. So can you talk about your books and kind of how they came to be and your most recent one?
Yeah, no, I would love to. And I want to stay on that for a moment around that standing apart as well, because I think the key element, even in just career, every meaningful role that I've been pulled into in my life has been because of relationships that have been formed. But personal brand and career brand have been so valuable. Look, I haven't sold enough books to retire. I never wrote it for money. I was doing this newsletter column in the 2000 or mid. I guess it was 2006, 2007, 2008, I was doing this newsletter column at AT&T, and it was always about sales and leadership. And I just loved writing about sales. When I was a kid, I wrote stories that featured all my friends, and, we'd go to outer space or we'd time travel. I just loved creative writing. So I was like, how can I marry these two worlds, right? And there's so many sales books out there. I didn't want to try to do what other people had done far better than I ever could. So once again, I tried to stand apart from the grain. I wrote a sales book inside of a novel about a fictional character that I created, that basically goes through all of these things, and then he writes the book about what he learned. And I got it published the old-fashioned way. I sent out about 1,700 letters to publishers and agents to get it published. Only 15 would agree to read it. 6 offered to publish it, and I picked the one with the best distribution. But again, the sales didn't light the world on fire, right? It was one of those situations, though, that when I was looking for work shortly thereafter, unexpectedly, I wound up being pulled into a role because my resume stood out, because guess what? I had written a book. So I got the interview only because of that. I got the job. I was there for a year. Ended up getting pulled into another organization because of a relationship that I made at the first organization. Then I got pulled into Microsoft as a result of the relationship that I had made there. So I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for that. And I wouldn't be where I am today in this organization if it wasn't for social, because of a value that I found that I could bring, identifying my own superpowers, but also the superpowers of others. So since then, I've written 3 other books. And near and dearest to my heart is the latest one, Salesman on Fire. I mean, it's just really a statement. It was written in the pandemic, but it's really just a statement about that fire that burns in us, that pushes us beyond limits and through adversity and uncertainty. Yeah. And I took, there was a 1970s novel that was written where the author, who had written a biography of Ian Fleming, I'm a big James Bond fan, but he had found the real James Bond. And he writes this story, obviously it's fiction, but he writes the story about interviewing James Bond. And I loved that idea so much that in that book, I personally interview my fictional protagonist of Birth of a Salesman. And so it was just a great experience. I love writing. It came about because of passion for writing, but also passion for sales. But it has benefited my career so much. And I've been able to talk to people all over the world when, again, I'm just a small town Midwest U.S. kid. And I consider myself so fortunate for that.
That's awesome.
Hey, so you said that your view on sales, right, as a whole has changed a lot since the initial book that you wrote. It's probably a super broad question, but I would say, what are some of the biggest changes that you've noticed in how you thought about sales years ago versus today?
Yeah, it's a great question, actually, and I can pinpoint exactly. In fact, I rewrote my first book a few years ago. That Ultimate Edition that you flashed on the screen was actually the revamped version, and here's why: because I have a hard time reading my old stuff, and I remember trying to like read Birth of a Salesman to get jazzed up to write something else, and I'm like, I can't relate to this. I can't relate to this guy, and I think part of it was because I grew up in a one-call close type of an environment, which was very transactional, not very relationship based and focused. And as I spread my wings and got into some other environments where I was working in enterprise sales and commercial and working in industries, it was all about the relationship, every bit of it. And so my focus switched so much from how do I keep this client on the phone who I've never talked to before and probably will never talk to again, to how do I develop a long-term relationship with mutual value mutual value being exchanged. How do I develop that? Because going from a sales cycle of I need to close this call in 20 minutes to, this could be a 3-year deal. That's where my mentality really shifted. And so I started to really look at the elements that were important of a relationship, also of importance of developing a sales team. And that really informed my new philosophy on selling, which thank goodness that I had that awakening.
Definitely.
That's good. So I have like a sales question because I got this asked, right? So I know we're focused on social sales in your books right now. But this was a good thing, and I think it could maybe help our guest or audience who's probably on here right now. Being a Microsoft, there's a multiple array of products and services that you offer. Huge company. And the person I was speaking to prior to this GovCast, they sell copier and printers, but then they also have all these other products, connectivity, connections, and they were just trying to figure out, how do I stop being labeled as the copier printer company and make sure that government agencies think about me when there's these other things? Because what was happening is copier printers, all right, we're going to do this, but then all those other things that they offer, they weren't even being considered for. And then they find out after the fact that it was executed. So in your Microsoft world, like, how do you not, I guess, position yourself like as a one brand company and, make sure they can buy everything else from you too?
No, that's an incredible question. And, I would say this. So I had the serendipitous timing to join Microsoft the week after Satya Nadella became our CEO 7.5 years ago. And so I've been able to watch that trajectory. Also have watched the stock price go from $30 a share to 260, which has been quite a journey. But one of the biggest things that he really did to signify how Microsoft would be going forward was shifting us to a platform organization. And rather than being the solution to everything, being an integrator and a critical partner, we've really partnered closely with a lot of our customers as well. And so looking for ways to have meaningful relationships and not necessarily always being the solution, but being involved in the solution, empowering people to do more the way they want to work. And so that's where I think has been the biggest shift. But it's a phenomenal question because of the fact that there's obviously still going to be the perception often of any organization, not just Microsoft, that you're always going to be, perceived conceivably by what you were previously known by. And so I think that's where the hard work has to be invested, is making sure to change that perception, investing your time and your resources in changing the perception that you are maybe what you once were. So I think that's the key element, is making sure that you're looking for ways to differentiate yourself from what you once were, trying to find ways to add value in the current ecosystem of what your customer is trying to do. And not always looking like, frankly, I've introduced my competitor in certain situations because I had a very close friend at a competing organization, and I introduced them because, frankly, there wasn't a place where I could play there. But it was more important for me for the relationship to be a trusted advisor as opposed to just trying to position something that would benefit me. I have what I call the holy sales trinity. Everybody has to benefit. It's the customer, our company, and myself. And you ultimately want to look for the variables in every single deal or relationship so that all parties get a win. And if it's one-sided, if it's lopsided, if I'm trying to cram a solution down somebody's throat just because it gets me paid, that doesn't benefit anybody in the long run. So I completely agree with your question, and that you've got to differentiate yourself sometimes from that perception that you want to distance yourself from. It's great to stand on that brand, and obviously there was a strong brand, but things change, times evolve, and we've got to evolve with it.
Got it. Thanks.
Can you speak to, Steve brings up the Microsoft angle, which is really interesting. So I assume that's a pro and a con in the social selling world, right? So can you talk about both those? I think there's folks that great affinity toward Microsoft, great brand. I see some folks are like, that's Big Brother. And so can you share with that? Like, I think it's probably an asset and sometimes a liability. And so can you share with our folks that maybe don't have a big brand associated with their online brand or their career, how maybe they can still build their social following?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I often like to point out that I cut my teeth learning social at a small consultant firm before I ever joined Microsoft. I used some of these tools in multiple small organizations before I even joined Microsoft. So whether you have a logo on your back or not, you do want to focus immediately right out of the gate on the value that you can deliver, the unique value that you can deliver. Why should this person take a meeting with you? What are the reasons? What are the things that you feel that you can bring to the table? And you're not going to get the meeting every time out of the gate. Excuse me. In fact, I can hark out to many situations where, specifically when I was working at a small consultant firm, there were bigger games in town. I was trying to basically sell my own expertise in sales and leadership to try to get the meeting. And I got some, I didn't get others, but there were some pretty prominent organizations that I was able to get in front of. And I think that's the key. It's like Stephen was talking about earlier. It's the at-bats. It's the contact sport element. So I think the key element, yes, I've got a brand on my back today, but I've had situations before where I didn't. And I think you've got to focus on where is the customer? How can I meet them where they are? How can I add immediate value out of the gate? What are the insights that I think I can bring to the table? But again, it's that focus on quality of messaging, quantity of outreaches, because I may go out and I may reach out to 10 people and completely strike out. Like, believe me, that happens to me sometimes. However, typically in a sitting of social selling or outreach, I usually reach out to 100 people minimum at one time. And you better believe that I get some responses. I mean, probably 30, 40 people will accept my request. And then of those, I will get at least 5 to 10 meetings as a result. And I call that a win. But I think that's the key is you can't just reach out to 10 people in an organization, strike out, and then call it a day. So yes, the logo may increase your odds. It may decrease your odds if there's a negative perception of that brand. But at the end of the day, too, you're a big part of your own brand. What is the unique thing that you have to say why they should give you that meeting?
Amen.
Yeah.
I have one. So I know you do a lot of social selling. You also mentioned you leave everybody a voicemail. So I would love, if it's okay, if you could maybe give an example of like, what do you typically say on your voicemail, right? Like what generates your callbacks?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, I think it depends on the role that you're in, but I'll speak vaguely, just given the fact that I obviously work for an organization today, and historically I've worked for some big and small organizations. But really, it could be good afternoon, Mr. and Mrs. Customer. The reason I'm calling, I identified some trends that were transpiring in your industry, or perhaps I saw that there was a new executive, or maybe that person is the new executive. The reason I'm calling, today you guys make a substantial investment in our organization, and I want to ensure that you and your team are privy to all the resources that you're entitled to. So I'd love to just sit down and talk about that, figure out where we can add some value, and if there's any opportunity to work together. Something of that stature, something short, sweet, to the point, and something that I feel that would give me the higher probability of getting a conversation. I think you have to go into any voicemail or any call unassuming. The bottom line is like, look, I've had a lot of customers tell me before that they've only heard from organizations that I've worked with during certain times, maybe during sales cycles. And I'm not pinpointing my current employer. I think that happens to a lot of us. We gravitate toward these dollar-making times, and we have to go against that grain. We have to reach out with immediate value that we can deliver. And I think leaving a voicemail just gives you a higher probability of success. I've stated my business, who I am, why I want to have a conversation, and then they get to make the decision as to whether or not. You're putting the power in their hands. Yes. And let's face it, that's empowering them to make a decision on whether or not they want to have a conversation to see if I can add some value for them. That's what it's all about.
Yeah, definitely.
So we talked about like the pros of sales. Some of the negatives of sales and how do you deal with them? Carson, I don't know if you can share any that come, but we always talk about the good times. These are things that are working. But what are some things, that haven't worked for you and that you've kind of had to deal with?
Yeah, I mean, look, the worst elements of sales are, frankly, you lose a deal. You've worked very, very hard to get a deal done, and it falls through, or you invest a ton in a relationship, you get the deal done, but then we fail on delivery. And I'm not talking about my current company. I'm just talking about sales in general. Like, delivery is failed upon, but guess where that falls? It falls on the seller. Same thing with very difficult negotiations. I've had situations where I thought I had phenomenal relationships in an organization, but we went through very, very tense negotiations. And at the end of the day, guess where that goes? As a seller, you're the one driving that. Everybody wants to be in the boat with you on the win and be, get the accolades, but often it's the seller that's the one that has to drive that home. I tell sellers all the time, I mean, sometimes you have to be Batman or Batwoman, whatever it is, because you've got to be the one that you've got to be the hero that can be the villain. If there's a scapegoat in the situation or somebody that, at the end of the day, the client dislikes, typically it's going to be you, and you've got to take all of that. And sometimes that's very challenging. It's very difficult, but if you do it well, you'll be rewarded well. And I think that's why it's very critical to always be a student of the game, look to do the best you can, look to serve your customers, look to engage your teammates and your colleagues and your business partners, do the best you can to deliver wins for everybody else, and you'll win by proxy. I focused on people and process my entire career. I've never, ever worried about my results, and they've always been there. But I think the key element is when you lose, what is there to learn from it? And, it is challenging, but frankly, the pros outweigh the cons. As I mentioned, I've met some amazing people throughout my career. Heck, I met my wife because I hired her 15 years ago. Bottom line, you meet some amazing people, friends that I've had all my life or almost all my life that I've met in career. And so I think the pros outweigh the cons for sales. And I love being a student of the sales game.
That's good. Who are you following right now? Who do you like podcasts or anything to gain more sales knowledge?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm a big fan of Jeb Blunt, Jeffrey Gitomer, Larry Levine, also John Kronemeyer. I'm going to mention him. We have frequent conversations. There's a lot of them, and I will miss some. Mike Weinberg is also a fellow St. Louis guy, and I'm reading his book right now. In fact, I gifted it to myself for my recent promotion, Sales Management Simplified. So just phenomenal. It's all about setting the foundation. So I love following people that talk about setting the foundation for success.
I love that look. I gifted it to myself. I love it.
Well, no, Jeffrey Gitomer is one person Jack turned me on to, and one of his sayings, we talked about when things don't go right. So if he got a sale, he'd buy himself a t-shirt or a shirt, right? But if he didn't get a sale, he'd still buy himself a shirt, right? So just celebrating, the wins and the losses, because you got to keep moving forward.
It's true.
I gifted myself. Listen, Carson. So look, Microsoft, AT&T, 7-time President's Club, 3 books, 400,000 plus social media followers. I mean, that's a very full sales career. And so
anybody can do it. Anybody can do it. I mean, that's the key element that I want anybody to take away from this today, is that all I did was focus on delivering value to people and following a process that I believed in that's changed substantially over time. That's it.
What would be your one piece of advice? Somebody's just starting. Let's just assume they're in their 20 or 30s, just starting to get online, want to have a positive, one that helps create deal flow online persona. What would be your best 1 or 2 tips? Where to start? How to start? How do they get out of the gate?
Yeah, network, be humble. I mean, those are the big elements. Try to create meaningful relationships, and put the social in social. Like truly, be genuine, be authentic with your outreach. Try to learn. I never assume I'm the smartest guy in the room. In fact, I never want to be. I want to learn from all of the people that are around. And I think that's the coolest thing about social, is that you can connect with anybody. I'm very surprised by the people that I've gotten responses from on social, like people like Jeffrey Gitomer and Jeb Blunt. I've been on their shows, but that's because years ago, when I had even less of a following than I have today, I reached out to them asking them if we could connect. And lo and behold, I wound up on their shows. So I think the key element is aim high, but just come to it from a place of humility and trying to learn, and you'll be pleasantly surprised.
Carson, thank you so much. Rock star in the world of sales, and has some government sales background too, right? We talked about before the show, has done some government sales mixed in there. And so how can folks connect with you? What's the best way to reach you? What do you have going on now that folks would be interested in?
Yeah, best place is LinkedIn. Connect with me on LinkedIn, and I genuinely would love to have a conversation. Talk about sales. In fact, I've been recording. Stephen was just talking about this. I've just been recording conversations. I was lamenting with somebody last year that I miss just sitting around talking about sales and leadership with people, and then I thought about it, and I'm like, well, obviously I can do that, and there's no geographical boundaries to me doing it. So I just started having video conversations with folks, talking about sales, leadership, and career. So LinkedIn would be a great place. You can also find me on Twitter. What am I working on now? Obviously very focused on the end of my fiscal year here at Microsoft. Also in the early stages of writing my 5th book, which will be called The Show Must Go On.
Oh, that's awesome. Any idea when that'll come out? When's the book?
I try to give myself loose deadlines. So let's call it 2022.
There you go. Sometime next year. That's awesome. Great. Carson, thanks so much for being on the show. Appreciate it. Continued success to you. Amazing. I think you've had the career most folks when they start out in sales want to have. So kudos to you. Congratulations. God bless.
I have to pinch myself every day. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks, Carson.
Thanks.
Those are all the boxes checked when people are like,
I
I want to get in there. I love to work for Microsoft, AT&T. I want to be in President's Club. I want to have a couple 100,000 social media followers.
4 or 5 books.
Right. I mean, geez, easy. That is amazing. So I don't know how. Kudos to the production crew for making that happen. I don't know how we're moving up the scale. So that's awesome.
It was the hostage situation, put him in a basement, force him to do it with a camera, and then let him go.
All right, are you moving? We're going to lock your door till you're on the show. That's when we reach out to you. Watch out. We could go to some extreme measures. So awesome. Thanks so much for joining us. Hey, I do want to promote also next week's show. And so for those of you who followed us online or follow the show, we started early this year. Our marketing team got together and said, hey, how can we really promote what's happening in the gov sales world? A lot of things obviously have been upside down. And hey, how can we recognize folks who have been doing great things in the world of government sales, both in selling, supporting folks that sell. And so we had this nomination process. You can go to govsaleshalloffame.com. And so we had a series of nominations, literally hundreds of folks. And so next week, we're actually going to announce the award winners for our inaugural class 2001 of the Gov Sales Hall of Fame. So next week, literally at noon, right now, you'll see some of their faces up there. I don't want to spoil the awards yet. So we will literally next week talk about who are our first inductees into the Gov Sales Hall of Fame. And so for our audience, really nothing in that. Like, we just wanted to reach out, acknowledge folks, thank them for what they're doing. And what's great, it was kind of a social crowdsourced award. Folks got nominated. And then we went through a selection process. And so we'll announce the winners next week, series of folks. Some of them will be on the show as well. So that'll be great. So I
love that you put that together, Jack. Give more than you get. And I've even seen these trophies and they come with white gloves. Very fancy. So kudos to you.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of stuff that goes with that. I try to do it in the most altruistic way, just trying to acknowledge folks. And so I think a lot of times we reach out and ask for things. And so really our marketing, Dre, what happened? Our marketing group really put it all together and just trying to find a way to acknowledge folks that are in the gov sales world. Was Dre didn't get anything, so she left?
Maybe she's hostage now. Maybe she got taken.
Is that what happens at the end of the quarter, end of the month? She just dipped out. I wonder, next Wednesday will be the last day of the month. So that's probably her early dip. She's like, oh no, I'm going to drop out of the show and next week's show. So don't miss next week. Literally some stars, literally in the gov sales arena will be with us, and just want to thank them and acknowledge them for all they're doing. So amazing. Steve, anything else before we go?
Should be great. Again, we talked about in the beginning of the show, the webinar replay is still up. So if you're trying to find money, get into the new fiscal year, July 1st, kicks off schools, and they got a boatload of money, $180 billion with a B. Yeah. So go to govsalesuniversity.com, click on webinar, and just pick the sales to schools and pick up some tips. Hope to help people out getting their sales going for this new fiscal year.
Andrea says goodbye. She hopes you all are going to have a great end of the month, end of the quarter. And so Lord knows where she went. And so we'll see you next week. Gov Sales Hall of Fame show. See you then. Have a great end of the week. Get ready. 4th of July is coming.
See ya.
Carson, great job.